All right, Josh is coming home. Good. So be ready.
For softball.
Oh, is it? Oh, that's right. Yeah, thank you. And if you're so inclined, there's going to be some pickup softball games at family camp. The guys from Billings want to play. So that'll be a lot of fun. I don't know. Justin Bolton from Billings is doing the organization. I don't know what he has in mind, but if you'd like to play, everybody's welcome. It's even less competitive than our normal non-competitive. So if you'd like to play, bring your glove, bring your whatever, and we'll all have a good time. So we'll do that also. Anything else going on? Thank you, Tim.
I'll tell you this after school.
Okay, deal. I'll be ready for you, man. Thanks, Oz. I appreciate that.
After church.
I knew what you meant. That's all right. Very good. Well, let's sing happy birthday to Adrian, shall we? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Adrian. Happy birthday to you. Good job. Good job. All right, gang. Very good. I think that takes care of just about everything on the list. At least I hope so. All right. Matthew chapter 26. Oh, thank you. That's the thing I forgot. All right. There we go. Thank you, Tim. Matthew chapter 26. You guys are there. I need to get there. Jesus is coming off the heels of what's going to be probably the second highest point in his ministry on earth. So if you're going to, really the pinnacle of Jesus' ministry is probably his coming into Jerusalem. They're just before he's crucified. We sometimes refer to it in different ways. It's been kind of established in its own thing. Sometimes we'll call it Palm Sunday, right? Jesus rides into Jerusalem on a donkey, and people are throwing their coats and palm branches out. Thousands line the streets, and they're chanting, Hosanna to the Son of David. If there's a high point of Jesus' ministry as far as from a physical perspective, that's really what it looks like on earth. But to that happened just prior, and that's when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. Right? Everybody had gone out and had heard that Lazarus had been raised from the dead, and it was such a significant event that even the Pharisees themselves said, we cannot deny what has happened. They said, we can't control, we can't spin the information, we can't keep it from the people, we can't deny, they said, that a noteworthy miracle has taken place. And so they decided that the best thing to do would be to kill Jesus and Lazarus. That way they could silence the message about... I know it's irrational. If he can raise Lazarus from the dead, you would think maybe he could raise himself, but that was their approach to the problem. So they said, we're doing no good at all here. We're losing control of the people, and they were. When Lazarus was raised from the dead, there were witnesses all over. Normally, when Jesus did miracles, he did them, generally speaking, in a quiet fashion, right? When he raised the little girl from the dead, he goes in, oh no, she's not dead, she's asleep. Right? Trying to minimize what Jesus was about to do. He does not do that with Lazarus. With Lazarus, he goes out to the tomb, all the Jews follow him, he's going to go, and they think to weep at the tomb. Mary and Martha, they all go out to the tomb, and Jesus says in the presence of all, move the stone. Excuse me, Lord, there's something we should talk about. If we move the stone, it's going to be because he's been dead for 4 days, right? Jesus said, I told you, if you believe, you'll see the glory of God. Move the stone. And they did. And then Jesus prays, right? Lord, I know that you hear me. I know that you hear me always. But for the sake of those standing around, I said it so they also may believe. This is different. And then with a loud voice, Jesus cries out, Lazarus, come forth, right? And Lazarus does. And every eye is fixed on Lazarus, and every jaw hits the floor. And they all knew. This was not something that was done quietly. This wasn't one of those miracles where Jesus said, okay, I'll heal you, but don't tell anybody. Jesus made this. This was a spectacle, and it was designed to be a spectacle because the next item on his list is the Passover feast. And so when Jesus rides into Jerusalem, the reason that the thousands are lining the streets is because everybody knows. And they're looking for Jesus, and they're looking for Lazarus. Everybody knows. In Matthew chapter 26, in verse 6, when Jesus was in Bethany at the home of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster vial of very costly perfume, and she poured it upon his head as he reclined at the table. But the disciples were indignant when they saw this, and they said, why this waste? This perfume might have been sold for a high price and the money given to the poor. But Jesus, aware of this, said to them, why do you bother the woman? For she has done a good deed to me. The poor you have with you always. You do not always have me. When she poured this perfume upon my body, she did it to prepare me for burial. Truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done shall also be spoken of in memory of her. The woman, when we compare Mark and John's account with Matthew's, we'll find out that the woman is Mary. The Mary, likely, who was Lazarus' sister. So what's happened is they've thrown a dinner in Bethany. Bethany is a city just outside, not far from Jerusalem, in a suburb, right? And so they're throwing this dinner in Jesus' honor, and Lazarus is there. This is a big to-do. It's in Bethany at the house of Simon, but Bethany is also the place where Mary and Martha and Lazarus live, two sisters and a brother. So in the aftermath of Lazarus' resurrection, they're going to throw a party. Well, what would you do if somebody was raised from the dead? Well, we'd have a party, wouldn't we? Is a good excuse. So, right, we'd have a party. That's what they did. And they invited everybody. And here's Jesus and Lazarus, guests of honor, right, in the home in Bethany of Simon the leper. And Mary comes in at that time. A woman came to him in verse 7 with an alabaster vial of very costly perfume. So not only is the vial expensive, but the perfume even more so. Now, they say in verse 9, the way Matthew records it, is that the perfume might have been sold for a high price and the money given to the poor. The other accounts record that high price as 300 denarii. You can basically make a denarius equivalent to about 1 day's wage. Okay, so in rough terms, 300 days is not quite, but pretty close to 1 year's worth of labor. So what we're talking about, after you subtract weekends and all that, you got about 300 days of labor in round figures. Average income in the United States right now is just north of $50,000. So if we put this in modern terms, they said, Jesus, do you know that this woman just dumped 50 grand on your feet? Now, we could have used that for something far more important. It says the whole house was filled with the perfume. I have an aversion to those strong kind of scents. And man, if I could get the boys at youth camp outside, boys, outside. Just, can you imagine how the whole house would be filled with the scent of that perfume? $50,000 worth of perfume. wasted. She poured it on his feet and wiped it with her hair. I know, it's weird, isn't it, Adrian? What could have been done with that, though? Jim's giving me the eyebrow. He's like, wait a minute. Something's up. What could have been done with that kind of money? I mean, $50,000. That's real money. What could have been done with 50 grand? Well, certainly the poor could have been helped, couldn't they? Let's all say amen. Amen. I mean, who can argue that $50,000 wouldn't have helped the poor? And after all, Judas is thinking of poor Judas, right? Because when he said, the other accounts bring out that Judas was the one. Now, he wasn't alone because his were indignant, so I think he probably enlisted another voice or two. Think of what we could have, Jesus existed on a shoestring budget. He really did. There were a group of wealthy gals who followed Jesus and the disciples from place to place and took care of their needs as far as what they needed to survive. They were his benefactors. Jesus didn't have big financial backing. People. Now, he could get a lot out of 5 loaves and a couple of fish, but still, that's a pretty small budget, right? And the disciple, it's too late now. We could have. Really, what could we have done? What could we have done? Well, we could have given it to the poor. That's one thing we could have done. There were a couple ways you could do that. You could just give it to the poor.
Yeah.
Or you could invest it in the poor.
Huh?
Well, let's say you wanted to, give something to your folks so they'd be taken care of in their old age. You could give it to the temple, couldn't you? You could give it to the Jewish rulers, and then they'd care for your folks in their old age, just like Social Security, right? You just trust it to someone else, and they'll take care of your folks for you. Isn't that a good idea? Do you suppose there's any kickback in that system? No. No, because that would be immoral, wouldn't it? Yeah. You suppose you could give it to the poor in such a way that there might be something in it for you? Probably not. The poor are the poor, right? You suppose, what else could have been done, though, with that kind of money? With that kind of cash, what could have been done? Oh, goodness, think of the possibilities, right? How much more could Jesus and the disciples, how many more places could they have gone? How much more could they have preached had they had that kind of money, that kind of cash at their disposal? The answer is none. But it might have been presented that way. What could have been done? Oh, Lord, what could we have done for the poor? Jesus said, you're going to still have the poor. Jesus knew that you cannot donate someone out of poverty. It doesn't work. You cannot raise someone out of poverty through charity. It's not possible. Jesus said, you'll always have the poor with you. And then he said something else. He said, you do not always have me. And he got a little bit testy. He said, leave her alone. And got right up in their face. Leave her alone. She's done a kindness to me. You'll always have the poor. You don't always have me. What she's done, she's anointed me for my burial. You can see where Jesus' mind is. Right? As he comes in, as the days are drawing nigh, Jesus knows. He's fully aware. What she's done, she's anointed me for my burial. Leave her alone. Again, the other accounts bring this out, but Matthew does also in verse 14. Then one of the 12, named Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, "What are you willing to give me to deliver him up to you?" And so instead of the 500 denarii, he got 30 pieces of silver, and that seemed like a good deal to him. See, but Judas was angry because Jesus called him on it. And so Judas goes to the chief priest and says, "All right, I'm ready to cut a deal. I'm ready to cut a deal." What else could we have used that money for? When you're investing, there's a number of things you have to think about. You have to think about, obviously, what the goal is. What's going to be your rate of return? You have to think about what are the risks involved? How likely is this to happen? If you're thinking carefully, you need to have an exit strategy. If something doesn't go right, if this investment turns south and you need to get out, are you tied to the ship, or can you take a life raft off of this thing? You need to consider those things. But one thing that people often do not consider is what's the cost of opportunity. So let's say that you're making an investment over here, but to do that, it means you didn't get to make an investment over here. What's the opportunity cost if I invest in one place as opposed to another? Is it wrong to put money into the poor? No, Jesus did that often, right? Even, in fact, so often that they assumed that later, when Judas goes out, that they thought, well, maybe he sent him out to do something or give something to the poor. Right? That was common. Jesus is not against giving to the poor. The question is cost of opportunity. So, what might have been? I tell the kids in school when I make them go through the personal finance course by Dave Ramsey, when we talk about what's the cost of opportunity, right? Every dollar, roughly, that they spend, this is not accounting for inflation, but every dollar that they spend while they're school age is $128 roughly of their retirement account that they're spending. So let's just say you spent $10, you went to go see a movie, and that's not enough for popcorn too. You must have smuggled that in. So let's say you spent $10 at the movie, right? So that movie, what's the opportunity cost of that movie? $1,280. Because that $10 multiplied by 128, which is roughly at, in round figures, let's say they make 11, maybe 12% on mutual funds over the course of their investment life up to, say, their mid-60s. The investment cost, what did it cost them to go to the moon? About $1,000 is what it cost them to go to the moon. Well, if they had put that money, that's the difference, right? That's the power of the cost of opportunity. Do you see it? Okay. Now, all of you now wish you had never gone to the movies, don't you? Like, now I wish I had not gone to see that 7 times, right? See, but opportunity cost is important to consider when investing. So that you'll always have the poor with you. What's a good investment? We could have taken that and we could have used it for such and such. And they were right. Could have. And it's a lofty goal, or, it's a to give to the poor. You've got a short time to be able to do for Jesus in this life before that opportunity closes. How much, when you consider opportunity cost, it's easy in the mind to say, you know what I'll do is I'm going to save it up and then I'll be ready. People do this with investing too. They say, you know what, I'm going to save it up and then I'm going to invest it and then I'll be ready to retire. That doesn't work. If I save it up, then I'll be able to. See, but you've lost the opportunity. How many people do the same thing when it comes to spiritual matters? The only reason we're talking about cash is so that you get an idea of what's going on spiritually. How many people think, you know what, as soon as I'm at this point in life or that point in life or I'm here or there, then I'm going to be able to really invest my time, my energy into the kingdom of heaven. Then I'll really be able to do it. Do you see the lost opportunity? Do you see the lost? What would have happened if you, right? When you were 15 years old, look what you'd have now. But what about if you had invested in people at that time? So who knows where what one of your disciples may have done in that time? What some of you incurred. See, the energy, the time, the effort that we put into the kingdom of heaven isn't lost or wasted. There's tremendous opportunity for continued growth in what you've put into the building of the house of God. And I don't mean these four walls. But what you've invested in people goes a long way. And the earlier and the more you invest in people, the longer it goes. That's one of the reasons why school is so important. See, the Christian school gives us the opportunity to invest, to pour into those guys everything we possibly can. See, so that investment continues for as long as it possibly could. See, the opportunity cost needs to be considered when we're talking about what should we do? Where should we invest our time? I was talking with Hannah last night, and we were talking about the public school system and and talking about how I think, in my opinion, the founders made a mistake in the organization of the powers reserved, implied, and denied to the federal government by not making, because education is not a denied power to the federal government, it's reserved to the states and the people respectively. So the states control education. That should have been a power denied to government because the risk of abuse is too great. I mean, it's far more dangerous to control education than it is to control speech. Because to do one is to have done the other. See, so how important is it to invest in those guys? See, what will they do and go? Things that you pour into the kingdom, things that you pour into Christ are not wasted. Now, the rest of the world is not going to see that. Weekend, you know it's Labor Day weekend, don't you? I don't know if you guys are aware of that or not, but Labor Day weekend is coming up, and I'm just reminding you that that's going to be a good time for a lot of folks, except you, of course, because you're going to family camp. Right? But isn't that how most people would see it? You're going to... How many sermons did you say happen over that weekend? And they start at what time in the morning? What? With it, yeah, right. Yeah, this year has the possibility to be a little chilly in the mornings. But see, you're doing what? Investing in the kingdom. And what you do to them, you do to Jesus by extension. Let me add a couple here. Turn to Luke chapter 12. Luke chapter 12. In verse 6, he says, are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 cents, and yet not one of them is forgotten before God. Indeed, the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Don't fear, you're of more value than many sparrows. If Jesus thought that that was true of them, shouldn't we place the same value on people? Now, we've got to sell we're talking in adult class, we've got to sell our time, energy, and money and organization as dearly as possible to get the most bang for every commodity. And it boils down to how do we pour the most into the kingdom of heaven? Okay. I'll give you another one here in Matthew chapter 6. Jesus said something that surprised the disciples. Because I assume that that's true because he began by saying truly. Right? He said, truly I say to you, which is what brought us to this passage today. Truly I say to you, right? Wherever the gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will be remembered along with it, will be spoken alongside it. In Matthew chapter 6, Jesus said in verse 2, I'll just give you one of 3 examples here that follow in succession. When therefore you give alms, don't sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and the streets, that they may be honored by men. Truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. But when you give alms, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, that your alms may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will repay you. You know, the Lord remembers just as surely what you do to build the kingdom of heaven. That's what Mary did when she interrupted, their nice little dinner party, broke the alabaster vial, because they were one use. If you were going to use them, you had to break them. It was like a piggy bank, right?